What if everything you've been told about Japan is a lie? For 3 decades, economists have called Japan a cautionary tale, a once mighty economy that crashed and never recovered. Western analysts point and laugh at their lost years, their stagnant growth, their aging population. But here's what they don't tell you. While the world was busy writing Japan's obituary, something extraordinary was happening in the shadows. What looks like decline is actually transformation. What appears to be weakness is calculated misdirection. Japan hasn't been dying, it's been preparing. And by the time the rest of the world realizes what's actually happening, it may already be too late to respond. The story everyone believes goes like this. In 1989, Japan's economic bubble burst spectacularly. Real estate prices collapsed, the stock market crashed, banks failed, and for the next 30 years, Japan supposedly wandered in economic wilderness, zero growth, deflation, a demographic time bomb. Western business schools teach this as a warning. Don't be like Japan. The narrative is so powerful, so universally accepted, that almost no one questions it. But narratives can be weapons, and sometimes the most dangerous thing an adversary can do is convince you they're no longer a threat. Japan's leaders learned something in that 1990s crash that changed their entire strategic calculus forever. When Japan's bubble economy imploded, it wasn't just a financial crisis, it was an existential awakening. Japanese leaders watched their nation's wealth evaporate overnight, saw their people's savings destroyed, witnessed their global influence crater. And they asked themselves a terrifying question. What happens when economic security fails? The answer reshaped everything. They realized that in the modern world, economic power isn't separate from national security. It is national security. Missiles can be intercepted, armies can be defeated, but control the right choke points in the global economy, you become untouchable. So Japan began building something new, not louder, not flashier, invisible, and infinitely more dangerous. The transformation happened so quietly that almost no one noticed. While China grabbed headlines with explosive growth, while America focused on tech giants and military adventures, Japan systematically repositioned itself in the global economy. They didn't chase growth numbers or stock market records. Those are vanity metrics. Instead, they pursued something far more valuable: control. Control over the things that make modern civilization function. Control over the materials, the components, the processes that every other nation desperately needs. They built what intelligence analysts now call the invisible empire. A web of economic dependencies so intricate, so essential, that challenging Japan means risking your own economic collapse. Here's a number that should make you uncomfortable. Japanese corporations quietly control approximately 40% of critical global supply chains. Not consumer products, not cars, the things underneath everything else. The materials that make semiconductors possible, the precision instruments that manufacture medicines, the specialty chemicals that no one else can produce. Most people couldn't name a single one of these companies. That's intentional. These aren't household brands competing for attention. They're invisible giants, embedded so deeply into global production that removing them would cause cascading failures across industries. Your smartphone, your hospital equipment, your electric vehicle, all of them depend on Japanese companies you've never heard of. Consider semiconductors, the nervous system of modern civilization. Everyone knows Taiwan makes most of the world's advanced chips, but almost no one knows that Japan controls the materials that make those chips possible. Specialized photoresists, silicon wafers of impossible purity, etching gases that exist nowhere else. Without these Japanese inputs, chip production stops completely. When Japan briefly restricted semiconductor materials to South Korea in 2010, it sent shockwaves through the tech industry. That was just a warning shot, a demonstration of capability. Imagine that same leverage applied globally during a crisis. Japan doesn't need to make the chips. They control what makes chips possible. That's the difference between visibility and power. The pattern repeats across industry after industry. Medical equipment, Japanese companies dominate the precision components that make MRI machines and surgical robots function. Fiber optics, Japanese manufacturers control critical segments of the supply chain that carries the world's internet traffic. Industrial robotics, Japan produces more advanced manufacturing robots than any other nation. These aren't accidents. They're the result of deliberate, decades-long investment in becoming irreplaceable. The strategy is elegant in its simplicity. Don't try to dominate finished products, Those are visible, vulnerable, easily targeted. Instead, dominate the invisible layers beneath. Become the foundation that everyone else builds upon. Then no one can afford to challenge you. But supply chain dominance is just one weapon in Japan's arsenal. Let's talk about something even more powerful: money itself. Japan holds approximately $1.2 trillion in foreign currency reserves, the second largest stockpile on Earth. Most people think of this as savings, insurance against crisis. It's far more than that. It's a weapon. Currency markets are the most liquid, most interconnected financial systems humans have ever created. Trillions of dollars move through them daily. And Japan has demonstrated repeatedly that it's willing to intervene aggressively. In 2022, Japan spent over $60 billion in a single operation to defend the yen. That wasn't defense, that was a demonstration. Here's what strategic currency intervention actually means. When Japan decides to move markets, the effects ripple globally within seconds. They can strengthen the yen to make their exports more expensive or weaken it to flood markets with cheaper goods. They can target specific currencies, destabilizing competitors at critical moments. They can coordinate with allies to amplify effects exponentially. Most nations don't have the reserves to fight back. And here's the terrifying part. Currency warfare is technically legal. There are no treaties banning it, no international laws preventing it. It's economic combat happening in plain sight, dressed up in the boring language of monetary policy. Japan has spent decades perfecting this capability while everyone focused on their military. But Japan hasn't ignored military power, they've redefined it. After World War II, Japan's constitution limited its military to self-defense. For decades, this was seen as permanent pacifism. That era is ending. Japan has quietly transformed its self-defense force into one of the most sophisticated militaries in Asia. They are building aircraft carriers, officially called helicopter destroyers for legal reasons, capable of launching F-35 stealth fighters. Their submarine fleet rivals China's in quality, if not quantity. And critically, they're positioning these assets not for traditional territorial defense, but to protect something far more valuable: trade routes. Look at a map of East Asian shipping lanes. 40% of global maritime trade passes through this region. China's economic lifeblood, oil imports, raw materials, manufactured exports, flows through narrow choke points that Japan can reach. The Taiwan Strait, the South China Sea, the waters around the disputed Senkaku Islands. Japan's new military posture places advanced submarines and missile systems exactly where they can threaten these routes. This isn't about defending Japanese territory from invasion. It's about ensuring that in any regional conflict, Japan holds economic leverage over the world's second largest economy. The military protects the economic weapons. The economic weapons make the military matter. Now consider Taiwan, the most dangerous flashpoint in global geopolitics. Everyone focuses on whether China will invade, whether America will intervene. Almost no one discusses Japan's role. But Japan sits just 100 miles from Taiwan. Any conflict there becomes a Japanese crisis automatically. Refugees would flood Japanese islands, military operations would cross Japanese airspace. The semiconductor supply chains that run through Taiwan connect directly to Japanese companies. Japan has no choice but to be involved, and Japanese leaders know it. They've been preparing for this scenario for years, building capabilities that make them not just a participant in any Taiwan crisis, but potentially the kingmaker. Here's what Japanese leverage over Taiwan actually looks like. If China blockades Taiwan, Japanese-controlled shipping routes become the only alternative supply lines. If fighting damages Taiwan's chip factories, Japanese semiconductor materials become even more critical. The bottleneck tightens. If America needs regional bases for military operations, Japan provides them or doesn't. Every scenario gives Japan extraordinary influence. They can enable or constrain any military response. They can determine whether sanctions succeed or fail. They can decide who gets access to the materials that keep modern economies functioning. Geography and economic positioning combine to give Japan a veto over how any Indo-Pacific conflict unfolds. But Japan faces a vulnerability that could undermine everything. Their people are disappearing. Japan's population is aging faster than any major nation in history. Birth rates have collapsed. By 2050, nearly 40% of Japanese will be over 65. The workforce is shrinking. This isn't just an economic problem, it's a strategic crisis. A nation can't maintain military strength with an aging military. It can't dominate supply chains without workers. It can't project power without people. Japan's rivals know this. They assume time is on their side, just wait for Japan to fade away. But Japan has a different response planned. When you can't solve a problem with people, you solve it with machines. Japan has bet its future on automation, robotics, and artificial intelligence, not as buzzwords or tech trends, but as existential necessities. Japanese factories are already among the most automated on Earth. Japanese research institutions are pioneering elder care robots, agricultural automation, service industry AI. The vision is audacious, a society that maintains economic output and military capability despite a shrinking population. If they succeed, they prove that demographic decline doesn't mean national decline. They turn their greatest weakness into proof of technological supremacy, and they become the country other aging societies must turn to for solutions. This is Japan's answer to those who think they're fading. Become so technologically advanced that population numbers matter less. Become the nation that sells automation solutions to every other country facing demographic decline, which eventually means everyone. South Korea, Germany, Italy, China itself, all facing aging populations, all potential customers for Japanese technology, all potential dependents on Japanese capabilities. It's supply chain strategy applied to the future itself. Don't compete where you're weak. Dominate where the world is heading. Create dependencies that compound over decades. Japan isn't trying to avoid demographic decline. They're trying to profit from it, theirs and everyone else's. Step back and see the full picture. Japan has spent 30 lost years building an integrated system of economic warfare capabilities. Supply chain choke points that make them industrially irreplaceable, currency reserves that can destabilize competitors, military assets positioned to control trade routes, technological capabilities that address their own weaknesses while creating new dependencies, geographic positioning that makes them essential to any Indo-Pacific conflict. None of these capabilities make headlines, none of them look like traditional power. That's precisely the point. Japan's leaders recognize something that most nations still don't understand. The next great conflict won't look like the last one. The next world war won't be fought primarily with missiles and aircraft carriers. It will be fought with supply chains and sanctions, with currency manipulation and controlled economic collapse. The winners won't be whoever has the most weapons. They'll be whoever can cripple their opponents' economies while keeping their own functioning. Japan has been preparing for this war while everyone else prepared for the last one. They've built redundancies into their supply chains, dependencies into everyone else's. They've accumulated the financial reserves to sustain economic warfare and the industrial choke points to inflict it. They understand that in modern conflict, economic weapons are real weapons. And here's what makes Japan's position truly remarkable. They did all of this while appearing weak. While analysts mocked their stagnant GDP, while competitors assumed they were finished. The narrative of decline provided perfect cover for transformation. No one sanctions a declining power. No one forms coalitions against a fading rival. No one prepares defenses against a nation everyone thinks has already lost. Japan exploited this perception masterfully. They built their capabilities in plain sight, disguised as desperation rather than strategy. By the time the world recognizes what Japan has become, the choke points are already locked, the positions already secured. So the next time someone tells you Japan is a declining power, a cautionary tale, a nation whose best days are behind it, remember what you've learned today. Japan hasn't been declining. It's been transforming into something the world has never seen before. A nation optimized for economic warfare in an age where economic warfare decides everything. The 2025 crisis isn't coming because Japan is weak. It's coming because Japan is ready, and most of the world still doesn't realize it. What looks like sunset is actually a patient predator waiting in darkness, and the hunt is about to begin.